All right, let's jump right in. We are going on a journey today. A journey that tracks an idea that totally changed how we think about, well, changing. It's a story that, believe it or not, starts with rats in a maze and ends up with a whole new way of understanding our own minds.
Okay, so let's start with a really big question, a provocative one. What if your personality, everything you think of as you, isn't some solid, unchangeable thing you were born with? What if it's actually more like a collection of skills and habits that you've learned over time? Because if that's true, it means you can unlearn the parts that aren't working for you and learn new ones that do. That right there is the huge idea at the heart of all of this.
So, to get this, we've got to go back in time to the early 1900s. This is what we call the first wave. Now, back then, psychology was mostly about digging around in the unconscious mind, all stuff you can't see. But then, a new group of thinkers came along with a pretty radical idea. They said, hey, let's just ignore all the stuff we can't see and focus only on what we can actually observe and measure: behavior.
You've got three main players on this stage. First, there was Ivan Pavlov, the guy with the dogs, who stumbled upon classical conditioning. Then you have John B. Watson, who basically became the champion for this whole behaviorism movement. And finally, B.F. Skinner came along and really fine-tuned our understanding of how consequences shape everything we do.
So, what exactly is classical conditioning? Well, it's all about those automatic, involuntary reactions. Think about this for a second. If you imagine cutting a juicy grapefruit, squeezing it, and tasting that sour juice, you might notice you're salivating a little bit. You didn't choose to do that, right? It just happened. Your brain has learned to connect the idea of a grapefruit with the real thing. That's classical conditioning. It's the same reason a kid who gets scared by a big barking dog might start to feel anxious around any dog.
Okay, so that's the automatic stuff. But what about the things we choose to do? That's where operant conditioning comes in. And the idea is actually super simple. If you do something and a good thing happens, you're more likely to do it again. That's reinforcement. If a bad thing happens, you're less likely to do it. This little chart breaks it all down. You can increase a behavior by either adding something good or taking away something bad. And you can decrease a behavior by adding something bad, that's punishment, or taking away something good.
So if you boil this whole first wave down to one single idea, it's this: a straight line. Your environment creates a situation, and that directly causes a behavior. That's it. Your thoughts, your feelings, they didn't care about that. To them, the mind was just this irrelevant black box. All that mattered was the link from the outside world to your actions.
But, things started to change. Around the 1960s, a kind of cognitive revolution took hold. Researchers and therapists started to say, wait a minute, you can't just ignore the black box. What we think and what we believe is absolutely critical. And just like that, the second wave was born.
And this was a huge, huge shift. We went from that simple, one-way street of the first wave to a super dynamic, two-way conversation. The world around us still influences us, for sure. But our thoughts and beliefs also shape how we see the world and how we decide to act in it. It's a constant feedback loop.
A huge piece of this puzzle came from a guy named Albert Bandura. He gave us this game-changing concept called perceived self-efficacy. That's a fancy term, but all it means is your belief in your own ability to get things done. And here's the wild part. Bandura discovered that what you believe you can do is often a way better predictor of success than what you can actually do. If you think you can do it, you're just so much more likely to try and to keep trying.
And that brings us right up to the modern day. The third wave. It really got going in the 1990s and is still evolving. And honestly, this is where things get really interesting, because the goal of therapy completely changed.
Check out this quote, because it says it all. The goal is no longer about getting rid of negative thoughts or painful feelings. It's not about first-order change. Instead, it's about second-order change. It's about changing your relationship with your pain. It's this radical acceptance that, hey, some pain is just part of life, and the real work is in how we choose to hold it.
So what does that actually look like? Well, therapies like ACT, that's acceptance and commitment therapy, are built on these themes. They teach you that fighting your pain is usually a waste of energy. Instead, you practice mindfulness, just noticing what's here right now without judgment. You learn to accept the pain you can't avoid. And the whole point of this is to free up all that energy you were spending fighting so you can pour it into building a life you actually care about, a life based on your values.
Okay, so we've got these three big movements: behavior, cognition, and mindfulness. So how do we actually pull these ideas together to understand why we do the things we do? There's this super simple but incredibly powerful tool that's used across all three waves. It's called the ABC model. To figure out any behavior, you just look at three things. A, the antecedent, what happened right before. B, the behavior, what did you actually do or think. And C, the consequence, what happened right after. When you look at things in this little sequence, the patterns just pop right out.
All right, I'm just going to put a number up here, 5 to 1. Any guesses what this could be about?
Turns out this is the magic number for a happy relationship, discovered by the researcher John Gottman. He found that for a partnership to really thrive, you need at least 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative one. And this is a perfect, real-world example of that first-wave idea of reinforcement. Those positive moments, a compliment, a hug, a little help, they all reinforce the bond and make it stronger. So that's the theory. But what does this look like when a therapist actually puts it to work? What's in the toolbox?
You know, even though these waves seem pretty different, there's a common DNA that runs through all of them. These therapies are always scientific. They set clear, measurable goals. They're also active. You're going to be doing stuff, not just talking for an hour. The focus is almost always on the present, on what's keeping the problem going right now. And it's never one size fits all. It's always tailored to you, moving step by step.
Here's a classic technique from that first wave that is still so powerful today, especially for things like phobias. It's called systematic desensitization. First, you learn how to deeply relax your body. Then, you make a list of your fears, from the tiniest bit scary to the absolute most terrifying. And you slowly, gradually work your way up that list, staying relaxed the whole time, until the fear just loses its power. And then you have something like modeling, which is pure second-wave thinking. It's basically learning by watching. A therapist might show you how to handle a difficult conversation, or you might watch a video of someone else doing it well. It's all based on the idea that we can learn new skills much faster by seeing them in action instead of just through trial and error.
So when you step back and look at the whole story, you can see this beautiful evolution. It all started with looking outside of ourselves, at our environment. Then, the focus shifted inward, to our thoughts. And now, we've arrived at a place where the goal is to change our very relationship with our own feelings.
And that brings us right back to where we started. If so much of who you are and what you do is learned, well, that's incredibly empowering. It means you're not stuck. Change is always an option. So the final question for you is this. If you look at your life as a collection of learned behaviors, which one would you choose to unlearn, and what new one would you start practicing today? Thanks for joining me.